This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with high-performance leadership consultant Shane Cradock about his latest book, The Inner CEO, and what we need to do to start living the life we were born to live. Shane chats about his fascinating story, how a phone call suddenly changed the course of his life, and how understanding how your mind works can be the key to unlocking life success. Let's have a great 2024, and with Shane's pearls of wisdom, it could be the best yet. Let's hear from Shane. Shane Cradock, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Greg. I'm doing very well. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And for transparency, this would be the first podcast of 2024, the first Win Happy podcast. But we're two tired men recording this at the end of 2023 when we nearly want to close down a year. And I think those feelings are really, really important. An exercise that I do with my team, they won't be hearing this in advance of our team day on Thursday, but a little exercise I do is I had a great 2024 because, and what I want them to do is just do a little bit of visualization. And I'm thinking that very, very last day of the year when you're kind of packing up, you'd like to leave the office or close the laptop with a sense of satisfaction about what's gone by. And I find that little visualization exercise can help. And it's a clever thing to do. And I feel I'm kind of in that boat now. And as usual, if you don't do that kind of thing, and if you don't have a bit of focus, the year can just disappear on you before you know it. And
yeah,
it's another, I need to run off and get some Christmas presents really quickly. So that's how I'm feeling. And how about you? How are you feeling?
Well, as I said to you just before we went live, I'm just getting over a vomiting bug. So, there's different ways I'm feeling. Physically, I'm 60% of where I would normally be. My spirit is actually pretty high, though. I'm in good form. And just go back on your point about, a great 2024. Like that's a great exercise. I mean, there's different ways. I've heard different people do that exercise, but I think it's a very powerful exercise if people do it, because I'm always amazed at if you give yourself permission to explore and go into like, well, hang on now, like as you said, I had a great 2024 because, and you really sit with that and go, well, hang on now, what would make 2024 really great? And if you can sit with that, go into your imagination, activate your intention, and then ideally write down the answer, because I think by writing it down, something else happens. I can't tell you the amount of times I've done things like that, and it's just been incredible what has happened. I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen with clients over the last, I'm kind of working with people in that kind of way, maybe 25 years, and just the amount of stuff that's happened and that they'll be shocked at, that I'd be shocked at. And I think the other point I'm going to say to you is that, we're talking about the time of the year, and obviously people listen to this, hopefully, well, they could be listening to this anytime, but we don't know, but
yeah, that's true.
You're bringing it out at the start of 24, but this message could be relevant, I think, anytime. But because of the time we're recording it, we're into the last week of December. And as I said to you, we'll talk about this later on. I was talking to a very important, I guess, mentor, counselor of mine from my past, just met for lunch today. But he reminded me that, 21st of December is the winter solstice. It's the shortest day of the year in terms of light, certainly in the Western Hemisphere and the Northern Hemisphere. And but the point he was making to me was that it's also the start of the growth period.
Okay.
It's the start of growth. So he said that's how he's 80 now. And, he put you to shame in terms of his energy and zest for life and his enthusiasm for life. But he just in 21st December, that's the corner turned. The days start to get a little bit brighter from that point forward, he said. But in terms of nature, that is the start of growth. And he said, and I want to be more in tune with nature about growth. So it's a great time of the year coming into January, listening to this, say, okay, fair enough. It might be a long month in January. Who cares? But it's time for thinking about growth and intention and what do I want to create? What do I want to plant?
Yeah. And the listener's probably thinking, why in the name of God am I listening to Greg and this character called Shane talking about 2024 and maybe influence them in some way to have a really, really good year? So you're a playwright, you're the author of 2 books, and you've got an international CV of working with top businesses. But you were making the point to me earlier as well that it's not all about those top businesses either. You work with loads of different characters in different industries and different disciplines. I suspect you like that, do you? That kind of cross-section of things.
Oh, yeah, no, I think definitely there's a very strong creative spirit in me. Took me a while to figure that out. It took me a long time to try and let it out, allow it out, and I'm still finding ways to let it out. But I really enjoy just variety. And I think the common denominator with my clients, no matter what field they're in, is that, and I was saying to this earlier on, is that at some level, whether it's stated verbally or not, they're coming to me because they want to improve their ability to win at life. And part of that is about, look, what impact do I want to make? What do I want to create? And a lot of the world is very focused on achievement. Whereas, as you discovered yourself, that doesn't last. It doesn't fill the gap in the middle of you. And that comes from something different, which is about, there's different words for it. Maybe we can explore that. But I tend to find people who are interested in that side of it coming to me to work, because that's really what lights me up. I get bored if it's just about the money.
Yeah. And you said something really interesting to me. You were saying there's some of them I won't work with.
Yeah.
And I know myself, even with clients, some of them come to you and you're like, of course we want all of our clients to succeed. But there's times when I'm really thinking, I don't like you and I don't like what you're motivated by. It's shallow and it's empty, and it invariably just runs, that train comes off the tracks if they're the motivations. But then again, if that's what rocks your boat. So you're all about the winning life and I'm talking about winning happy. So it sounds like that we're quite aligned.
I would say so.
in our ideas and our thinking.
Yeah, no, it would seem like it. Yeah, I mean, like win happy, I kind of get the sentiment, and certainly what's the point? I mean, look, what's the point in going on the journey of life if you can't enjoy it? Like, it's an incredible gift, and that, as corny that sounds, and it's hard. It's hard because like life is not necessarily set up that way, and I don't think we've been taught the basics of how to win happy or win at life, whatever way you want to call it.
So the new book is called The Inner CEO.
Yes.
I want to hear about the book. I want to hear about Morris, that important person in your life a long time ago.
Yeah.
But to put all of that into perspective, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, just so they understand where this book came from and what experiences led to it. So the question is, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
I hate this kind of a question.
Huge rewind. Where did you grow up? What did mum and dad do?
Okay, yeah. Well, look, I grew up in Kilkenny. I'm a cat. My dad had a job that a lot of Irish people would love, which he worked as a kind of a brewer in Smithwick's Brewery in Kilkenny. Was taken over by Guinness. Galway man. My mum was from Galway, Clare, kind of a place called 6 Mile Bridge. She would have been what you would call maybe a homemaker, if that's the right word. But she was also very, I think she's very kind of entrepreneurial in her own way. She had different kind of businesses on the side. One was like a puppet show business. She was a very actress and director in Kilkenny, which I probably got my love of theatre from there. And she was also kind of a pioneer insofar as that my brother Mark would have grown up, and they discovered when he was about 7 that he had a hearing issue. His left ear was deaf and his right ear only had about 40% of his 50% of his hearing. So mom actually was incredible support and actually learned how to teach people who are hard of hearing, adults hard of hearing, and set up the first school in Kilkenny to teach adults who are hard of hearing, because really what happened with Mark. So that's kind of background there. And I don't know, a regular guy growing up in Kilkenny, I left school and I did engineering in UCD. I specialised in chemical engineering. And then after college, I got a job in Bord na Móna for a year and a half. And then I eventually found myself to the best place in the world, Greg, Cork, by getting a job in Pepsi-Cola International Concentrate down Little Island. And I was there for maybe 5.5, 6 years. And I kind of went in there on a kind of a management training program, and then just evolved then into kind of different executive jobs there.
I wasn't too far away from you. I was the GM of Nash Beverages,
okay,
which I think were around the corner from PepsiCo in Little Island. Yeah, and I used to work for Guinness, so I was down at the Smithwick's Brewery.
Oh, there you go.
You can see we've walked some of the same
We're-
roads and
we're
everything else.
destined to meet.
Yeah, exactly. This route to chemical engineering, where in the name of God did that come from, or what stirred in you?
I don't think it stirred me. I think I was following advice from my dad. I think like I didn't really know what I was about growing up. I didn't know, like a lot of people, I think you think of like, what am I going to do with myself? My dad, he had done chemistry in college. I think he'd always wanted to do chemical engineering. Well, I know he did. And he said to me, do engineering if you can't do chemical engineering. And I was like, oh yeah, grand, whatever. And he said, look, you know, and then from there, he said, as a license learner, you figure out what to do from there. So that's what I did. And I think at one point I was thinking, sure, look, maybe I'll go try and work in Guinness. You know, you're following something that you at least know works for somebody. And I was ended up going into the drinks industry. So I had summer experience working in the brewery, and I ended up in Pepsi. And I really enjoyed working in Pepsi. I learned a huge amount about business and things like that. But that was kind of the way in. I remember one time like thinking about, God, will I do something more creative? And I remember saying out loud to my mum one time, because she was an amateur actress, so maybe acting's a way to explore. And she goes, no. You won't make any money going that way. That's not a proper job. And I remember kind of going, oh, right, that's the end of that. Then I won't say that out loud again. So, so I said I'd follow engineering. And look, engineering was brilliant, but I knew I wasn't going to stay in it. I just wasn't quite sure what the other thing was going to be. And as I said to you, like in the book, I explained this, and I explained part of that journey was that when I was in Pepsi, I ended up getting into a depressive spiral that had been building probably over 2.5 years. And then it was going through that experience that really allowed me to go, well, hang on a second here. You asked a question, which I think is probably the all-time biggest, most important question to ask anybody is, who are you? And when I went through that experience, I remember coming out there just thinking, hang on, who am I? Who is Shane? Like, what am I really about? Like, why did I even go for that job? Why did I do engineering? And I had to go backwards and explore, and then just explore things like, well, what do I want to do? Why? What's my purpose? Why do I think I'm here? And then ask those kind of all of those existential questions. And then that led to the start of crumbs on a new path, which over time I've been able to build a life and career out of.
So all of that questioning of yourself and what you were doing, your purpose, how did that end up taking you down a dark path?
Sorry, the questions of that came out of going through the good.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit there myself. So, you know, I don't know if you remember Little Island. There was on the way out of Little Island on the right hand side, there was a kind of a path, and there was an old telephone box. I don't know if you remember that. Do you?
Yeah,
no?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's a very important part of my own journey, because there was one day where I went down there on a Friday in July 1995, I think it was, and I was ringing home to my mum in Kilkenny. Effectively, I had gone through this weird checklist of last things to do before I checked off the planet. So I had a plan to exit stage left that particular day, and that was the last checklist, was to hear my mum's voice. And but not say the words goodbye, but that would be goodbye. But my dad answered the phone, and my dad's name is Jim, and he would normally try and get me off the phone quite quickly. He wasn't really into deep, meaningful conversations on the phone.
Yeah.
It was more, as I joke now, it'd be like more, did you see the match? How's work? And do you want to speak to your mom? And within 60 seconds. But this time, he'd always picked up something was wrong, and he wouldn't get off the phone. And then he just kind of persisted and said, what's wrong? And I couldn't articulate it. And eventually I broke down, and I couldn't say what was wrong because I didn't know myself. I couldn't even say the words out loud because I was too embarrassed of how bad it was. And then he kind of made me promise to stay in the phone box once he realized how bad it was. And he said he was going to ring somebody. He called me back in a few minutes, and he said, I want you to ring this number. Who's this? He said, it's my friend called Morris. He's going to help you out, but you have to ring him now. And so I said, okay. And I rang Morris, and Morris was a counsellor, which initially I didn't like because of my ego. I didn't think I needed help. And that was the start of change. And so to that start of change, Morris had said to me, he got out of me what I was going to do. He said, that's not good. That's quite serious. You're going to go back to work. You're going to make your excuses. You're going to jump in a car and you're going to drive down to Waterford. So I drove that road from Cork to Waterford on a blue sky day in July 1995. And then that was the start of change. And through that process of change over the next 6 months with him, that allowed me to kind of save my life, and B, move in a new direction. And then that new direction, Greg, was me trying to figure out who the hell was I and what did I want to do with my life? Because I'd never really given myself permission to honestly look at that. And it was scary. And that's when the questions really started.
So your non-chit-chat dad, for some reason, picked up something in his own kid.
Yes.
That it was wrong. It was just wrong. Was that the time of the day you were calling, do you think? Or was it something in your voice? Were you very upset? Or is he a man who can tuned into emotions like that, is he?
No, I don't think so, with all respect to him. But I think, I don't know, I'm a parent now myself, and I think something else comes in as a parent when you're with your kids, whether you call it love or it's intuition or just you've been around them enough to kind of know something just hits you and you go, no, hold on a second here. I think most parents would know that, even though you don't want that to happen, but it's like an intuition or something. So for me, I think it was probably more his intuition. He was having a late lunch. He wasn't meant to be there. I think there was a bit of somebody looking after me too. Just he was there at a certain time. He wasn't meant to be there. It was a late lunch. Like it was, he shouldn't have answered the phone. So I think it was more, to me, it was more right place, right time, heavenly intervention maybe, and also just his intuition.
Yeah. And to the outside world at that moment in time, were you functioning? Were you functioning in work? Were you functioning to your pals? To you functioning to your siblings, to your parents?
Yeah. It's a great question because actually, I think, the answer to your question is yes. I mean, I was functioning away. I mean, nobody knew how bad I was. And I was at a reunion a couple of months ago, 30-year reunion, which is difficult to say in words, Greg, because you still think you're a certain age. But I remember being at that and, my classmates would know some of the story now because of the books coming out or whatever. But one of them said, and he didn't mean it in a bad way, but he was just looking and said, "Are you sure you were depressed?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, the guy that I knew just was never like that. He was like happy-go-lucky. He was always cracking a joke. I said, yeah. I said, look, have you ever talked to anybody who has lost somebody through suicide? And he said, no. And I said, well, maybe you should do that because I have. And generally what you'll find most of the time is that they'll go, I just had no idea. And you just can never judge a book by the cover when it comes to things like mental health. That's why, like, even with a lot of my friends, I'll kind of go, I look at them, but that's not enough. Well, I kind of go, how are you? And they go, I'm grand. You're not, I'm grand. But I go, no, really, how are you? And that generally gets a different reaction. And I think it's worth people just checking, realizing that. I think most people don't realize that you can be very outwardly, everything's fine, but actually going through hell. And I came across something which is worth checking out for people online. It's a little video clip. It was brought out on World Mental Health Day by the football club Norwich FC. I don't know if you've seen it. And you can see it on YouTube. You just put in Norwich FC mental health video, and it's just got two friends at a soccer match. And they're wearing Norwich jerseys, and you see the camera face on the crowd around them. And one of the guys looks quite down, and the other guy is actually smiling and he's joking. And they see them going to maybe about 10 matches together over time. And then one of the matches, one of the seats is empty. And the guy who's looking sad is there, and the guy who's happy is not. And they make the point that you don't know from looking on the outside in how somebody's really going. And they're saying, like, dig deeper, talk a bit more deeply with your friends, check in. And it's a simple thing, but it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And it's funny now that you say that, because I think as we're all moving faster in this world of ours, you know yourself, you see the phone number coming through from whoever, and you're thinking, shit, that's Shane now on the phone, and I'd like to say hello to him, but that's going to be a 15-minute phone call, so there's actually no point in me answering. And if you're organised, you might get around to that, calling Shane back later that evening and having that 15-minute phone call. But 9 times out of 10, you'll forget unless Shane rings again. And then, okay, oh God almighty, there's something up here now, I better talk to him. So many of our communications have moved to just send a text.
Yeah.
Don't have a conversation, because it's kind of very strange. I think even our psyche is, ringing someone has become rude. You don't interfere with anyone with a thing as big as requesting a conversation.
And do you think that that's across all generations, or do you think it's only specific generation?
Well, I'm 58, so I'm experiencing it with so many people that I deal with. Yeah.
Wow.
I think we've all been carried along with that. I've been seeing my mum ringing, and she's in great health. She's 88. She's widowed. She is amazing. My daughter was saying the other day, I think Gran is a bit lonely, and it kills me, Shane. You're in the middle of a busy day doing whatever crap, and you see the phone ringing, mum. She's found out how to send messages and WhatsApp and everything else. But it shames me to think there's times when I'm kind of, oh God, I just don't have the time now for that phone call,
Yeah. I think that's been a bit hard on yourself.
Possibly. But I do think we're moving very, very fast. And if you think about your conversation with your dad, and having the time to just probe a little bit, because often you'll see the call and you just send them, stuck in a meeting. Can I call? I call later?
Yeah. You're right, because even at that time, there was no mobile technology. This was a mobile phone. I was ringing a landline from a payphone.
Yeah. So you needed the coins.
Exactly. Yeah. There was an exchange, and the 50 pence piece, and there was a dick waiting for the thing to connect. So it was that kind of an era. Look, I think you're right. I think we are, there's no doubt there's a trend towards moving away from conversation, which is not a good trend. And I think just, as a friend, there's no doubt, look, listen, I see the phone ringing from my parents. I know sometime that phone call will stop. You know what I mean? They won't be there anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm more aware of that now than ever. But I guess it's getting the balance between, you can't take every call. That's just the reality. Because you run a business, Greg. So do I. There's stuff to be done. Yeah. And as I say to mom, or my dad, listen, don't be ringing me in the morning now, because unless there's a fire. Because if there's a fire, I will pick up. But if I'm answering the phone and it's like, listen, I need your help working this iPad, I'll be like, I think I'm going to call you back. You know what I mean? So it's trying to get that balance. Otherwise, you'd be walking around, you'd never turn the phone off. You'd only be waiting for, for these phone calls.
And tell me, how did your dad have Morris's number?
Good question. My dad was a senior guy, obviously, in Smithwick's Brewery, and he had hired Morris. Morris had this interesting expertise where he was bringing in, and I think actually Smithwick's was one of the first, I think in Ireland, that did it at the time. So they were a bit of a pioneer, where they were trying to bring in a program to help people recovering from alcohol addiction. And obviously in the brewery, for some, that was a problem. And Morris had come in, having been a recovered alcoholic himself, to design a program, first of its kind, and bring it into the brewery. And I think they had gotten very friendly through that. And Morris was always very grateful to Dad for his help, because I think it was one of his most important contracts at the start to establish himself in Ireland. And I think they just connected, and that was the beginning. And luckily for me, that was where Dad met him.
And he's an important guy in your life. You went on a long trek today to see him.
Yeah. I was just saying to you before we went live here that I haven't seen Morris for 10 years. And with the book coming out a few weeks ago, The Inner CEO, I'd sent him a copy, because one of the chapters, I think the first or second chapter, is called Fridays with Morris, where I suppose it's just to position the story of what happened, some of the stuff we talked about, the difference it made, and why certain things were said that provoked certain buttons in me. And I sent him a copy, and he replied a few weeks ago to say, hey, it'd be great to see you in person. So I drove down to Waterford today to meet him for lunch, and we had a great conversation. And Morris has just turned 80 himself. Physically, he might be the same guy as he was when I first met him, but spiritually, emotionally, life zesty, he's probably better than ever.
So what was that chapter about?
The chapter was about the first conversation with Morris, and also that phone call that I mentioned to you. And when we sat together in his office in Waterford, that first conversation, he asked me a question which changed my life. His question was, do you realize that you have a mind? And nobody had ever asked me that question. And nobody ever pointed out to me that I had a mind, or that it even mattered. But for me, what happened was I heard the question kind of in two ways, which I don't actually think he intended, right? But this is what happened. So I heard it as, okay, I have a mind. Because he said to me, do you realize your mind? I was like, well, kind of. And he goes, yeah. He says, well, you got a mind, and it kind of determines how you work and operate in the world, and even how you feel. And your mind is really tangled up like a ball of wool, a twine of wool. And like if you're willing to put in the work, I'm going to help you untangle that. And so that was, I thought, okay, great. And he said, look, unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Didn't want to hear that bit because there was still a lot of pain involved over the next 6 months while we worked together. But the second way I heard it was, apart from that, I had a mind and he'd look after it. That was the first bit. The second bit was, well, if I have a mind, that implies it's separate to me. Well, then who am I? And that really was a humdinger. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it was important. And it really confused me. And it wasn't for many years that it took me many years to get an answer to that question for me. And it's a question worth pursuing for anybody, because I'll say that question to clients now. I'll say, do you realize that you have a mind, that you're not your mind? And they kind of go, yeah, I know I have a mind, but am I not my mind? And I'll go, no. And that's what the inner CEO is about. The inner CEO is about the observer behind the mind. And really, it's about learning how to become the boss of your mind, which is separate to actually the real Shane, the real Greg, the real listener. And that sounds a bit woo-woo. And I think that's fair because it's intangible and it's unseen. And I think as I realized in my own career, as I've gone along working with different people in business and sport and life and artists and things like that, I've realized that part of my job is making the unseen intangible, making it seen and making it practical, that people can kind of go, oh, hold on, now that kind of makes sense to me because that's happened to me and I can relate to that. And that's kind of the way my life has unfolded, that seems to be what gives me purpose.
And from your experience, Shane, like to use Morris's words, your mind was tangled.
Yeah.
And he wanted to help untangling it. I presume at some level, all of our minds are a little bit tangled, but there's obviously a severity in all of that. Yours was severely tangled and that had you nearly making the last phone call. But there's other people, I presume, dragging their heels through life, with heavy heart, heavy mind, heavy whatever clouds over them, who are somewhat tangled. Yeah, and I presume book all about that untangling and having that clarity. And
yes, it is about that. I think it's also about my own take on it now, because I explored many different ways that maybe you can untangle your mind and maybe harness your mind. And I think I got myself into, conventional stuff, weird stuff. And then in pursuit of trying to figure out what actually works. So to your question, is everyone's mind tangled up? I think everyone's mind, has got a certain degree of tangling up. I think that's just the way it is, You pick stuff up from your childhood, from traumas, from random experiences. Of course, you're going to have stuff that's in there. The question really is it stopping you living the life that you were born to live? And that's where it's a problem. And so for most people, once you realize actually that the tangling up, if it's there, it's actually in this thing called a mind. But if I realize that I'm not my mind, it's easier for me to detach from that. And it frees me up. So I might have stuff happen to me in the past, in my childhood, like we all do in different levels, some more severe than others. Maybe bad stuff has happened to me, but that's life. But I could have 10 people and they have really traumatic thing happen to them. One or two of them might use that experience to create greatness, and 8 of them might use it to hold them back. So what's the difference? I think it's an inner thing. It's a difference in how they see themselves inside. Now, a lot of the time it might be unconscious, but they figured something out that allows them to move faster or lighter.
So Shane, that untangling and the getting to now I know who the hell I am, was that a long process?
It was long enough. Yeah, it was long enough. I mean, for me anyway, all I can speak is my own experience. I think I would have got what I thought was a good enough answer after maybe 3 years. But looking back, it wasn't really an answer. It wasn't. Okay. It was kind of, it gave me enough to kind of go, that's who I think I am now. But then, as you're going along in life, I think it's one of the great unfolding questions that there's the real depth to answering that. That's very personal, But it's maybe one of the most important questions to commit to exploring, because it just opens up so much. And I mean, in a way, like we're talking here at a very, to me, like we could say philosophical level, and some might say even spiritual level, But what I've realized myself is that the more I am clear about who I really am, the better everything else seems to go. I mean, I don't get punched, or, I don't have a bad day or a bad week, or that I don't get a vomiting bug. But it's a great question to answer. And I just think it's the kind of question that most people, go back to your point about people getting busy. Without a doubt, society is getting busier and busier. And as it gets busier, those kind of questions, or the ability to reflect on those kind of questions, seems to be going out of fashion, which is it's a dangerous thing. So for me, that, like, I really value my space, not to sit and kind of contemplate that question forever, because life has to be done, business has to be done, you have to get on and live and make an impact and go out and do things. But to at least give yourself every now and again the gift of saying, hey, let me just pause for a second here now and, like, see, well, what's going on with this guy at the moment, and is he still on track? Is the path that he or she is on, is it still lighting him up? Is the fire still burning inside? Like, for me, Greg, the fire inside, to me, is one of the most important things that I look for now. Because I know what it feels like for it to go out, or to almost completely go out. And I think too many people are living with a fire that's kind of really, it's lower than what it should be. And I actually think, if I'm being honest, that is most people.
I always talk about this state, and I called it being happily pissed off.
Okay.
Where you're kind of pissed off at life, but you come through that same door to that same set of circumstances, and you go to that same job, and you meet the same buddies, and you do the same thing at the weekend, and life isn't great, but there's comfort in that routine and everything else.
Yeah.
Because change is a dodgy enough, scary sort of a place to go. In particular, and I think when you were making that career choice, and I think for me as well at that time, we were all urged to go on the path of the safe job and the safe career and everything else. I think maybe the younger generation since are probably a little bit more adventurous, and they can explore more possibilities, but maybe there's more risk in that as well. Did the Shane, when you were going through all that process, did you return to work? Did you try to get back to the things you were doing before everything got very tangled? Or did all of that stop? Yeah.
On the outside looking in, as I say, like, nobody would have known what was really going on. So I was still working. Like, work didn't stop. And I continued on my job then at the time with Pepsi. Yeah, nobody really would have known other than my parents and Morris. I didn't even tell my close friends what was going on. I think I might have told the first one maybe 9 months after that particular moment, when I felt I was on an upward trajectory, and I started to get into things like the mind, psychology of achievement, and lots of areas around that. And so I just kept on exploring. So, I came out of the whole thing in time. It probably took about, I think, maybe for me, maybe 12 months before I felt, actually, yeah, I'm back at ground zero. And it wasn't until a friend said to me, what have you learned? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you're different. He said, you're you. He said, but you're kind of better. What have you learned? And I was thinking, I don't know what I've learned. And then I started to think about, well, what have I learned? And then that friend, who was a personal trainer, he was running these workshops around the country, and he said, would you come in and talk to some of the people in the workshops? He was like about health and fitness, nutrition. Would you talk about psychology of kind of goal setting? Because I was talking about that a lot to him, just as a friend. And I said, but sure, I'm not a psychologist. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, but you kind of get it. And I've seen you change. So obviously you know something. So then I went, okay, well, I'll go in and talk for half an hour. And I did a very short presentation, and he loved it and went down well. He said, why don't you do it at the other workshops? So that was the start of me moving in a different direction. And I realized, hang on a second here, I really enjoy this. This is making a difference. It's also encouraging me to learn more so I can share more. And then that started something that ultimately became a career. I didn't know that at the time, though. And then, I was with Pepsi for another 5 years, and I loved working there. I really did. And I advanced up through the ranks, even from what I was learning about the mind and managing myself. But then I also realized, as I was exploring the questions in parallel with that, like, what are you about? What do you stand for? Who are you? I went, I just was looking at the career ahead of me in the corporate world. I went, this is not for me, and I have to jump ship. And I kind of jumped ship dramatically at the time. Like, nobody saw coming, especially my boss, and he had gone out on a limb to get certain things for me in terms of a new job and getting an MBA approved in a top college. And he literally went, boom, here you go. And on that day I went, it just coincided. And I just went, look, I'm really sorry about this, but I have to leave. And I jumped out with no plan. Now, I wasn't married. I had no kids. I was single. And looking back, it was quite crazy, but it worked over time.
I did that handing in of the notice, and I had a lot of those entanglements and big bills left, right, and centre.
Right.
We've all got a fantastic ability to adjust your life to the income that you're earning.
Yeah, well, it's true. Well, you kind of can, yeah. Well, did you do it? Did you do it when you were in a relationship or children were there, or were you?
Well, it was after a relationship collapse, so there was, there was maintenance and everything else at that point in time.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was a strange time. I had, GM of a drinks company, relationship, having the maintenance. I actually had record stores as well at the time.
Wow!
As an aside, which sounds like a great idea, having your own business on the side. But to be honest with you, it's not good advice if you want a successful business. You need to focus on it. And I did that for 12 years, Gee,
wow. There was a record store in Cork, was it?
Oh, God, there was one in Cork and one in Limerick and there was one in Dublin.
Oh, what was it called?
Yeah, Black Track.
Oh, yeah, okay, right, yeah. I definitely heard of Black Track, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was a good, solid business for a while, Yeah. But I remember when that moment came, I always thought it was going to be a huge decision to make. Like, how are you going to even contemplate something like this at the time, because you have too many responsibilities? And when it came to it, I swear to God, it was the only thing I could do.
Yeah.
I just can't do this again. No, I did have a plan and everything else, but it wasn't a plan with loads of guaranteed money or anything like that, But I did move on to, actually, which became Fusion and everything else. Yeah, what we're doing now.
And sorry, to break on that, like for you to think, I'm often kind of curious about these kind of decision moments, because for me, that was the same. As in, like, did you just you said there was no decision, it's just that was the way to go?
Yeah, it was a case of, I cannot continue with this. I have to make this decision. Even if it's risky and all those, I could have hung in there, letting the misery just get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I just knew, no, I'm out of here. I just company car, the whole lot.
Yeah. I find those kind of things fascinating, because you can sometimes hit a moment of clarity out of a crisis or an extreme pressure situation, and you just go, do you know what? Boom, decision is made. As it happens for me, when I left the job, what had triggered that decision, and it was a moment of what I would call extreme clarity. And there was no plans, but I just knew I had to go, and it was the right decision. I had taken time out to go on a retreat, literally for 2 weeks, and I had taken time out, and kind of while I was on the retreat, and it was all about like mental relaxation and things like in your mind, I remember having this moment of clarity that, I need to leave my job. It was just very clear. And I think that was the start maybe of realizing as well, and that there was no going back, just like I could not. And my mind would come in afterwards and go, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about income? And what about this? And what about your career? And what about job and pension? And it just was a very deep level eureka moment. And I've become very fascinated with that kind of thing. And that to me is even what I would point to in general with clients now. And again, it's to do with the inner CEO element, which to me is just that, it's that deeper awareness inside all of us that actually will give a gift of an insight or clarity. And sometimes it's through an extreme pressure moment where you're just looking up at the sky, raising your fist, kind of going like, why are you picking on me? Right? Or it's from extreme calm. Now, obviously, the extreme calm is a more pleasant experience.
It's probably the better route.
yeah, but you know what? I think as humans, that's the bit that I'm interested in, is that I'm interested more and more in cultivating that for myself and my clients, where you kind of get these insights without the extreme stress. And that is innate. That's what I'm seeing, is that it's wired into us, that there's a kind of an intuitive insight or understanding inside you, me, everybody listening to this, that actually kind of wants to look after us. As weird as that might sound, but that's my experience. It kind of wants, and go back to what you asked me about my dad. I don't know, for me, and I might be wrong, maybe this is just me making it up, but I feel there's some sort of connection between that and my dad picking up the phone, picking up, as you said, like what made him pick up that thing. Like, it's like if everyone's ever had the experience of the phone rings, you don't see who's on it, but you know, that's such and such. And it is such and such. And you go, what is that now? And I think it points to something that I think that's deeper inside all of us. And that's what excites me, because I'm very interested in trying to, in particular in business, bring that more into the business world, because I think it's lacking in the business world. And I think that's one of the reasons why the world is the way it is, that people get too much in their ego and into even the corporate world. It's a certain entity, an animal. And I think it's missing some of that, whether you would call it creativity or human spirit or freshness or aliveness. All those words are connected to what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And being motivated by something other than money, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Being motivated by other things. And it's really important. So from the boy who handed in the notice without a huge safety net, and you're doing the odd workshop here and there, and people seem to be buying what you're selling, even though you've no technical qualifications. At what point did that become a career, and you were able to give people invoices for something?
I learned the hard way. Like, as I say, you don't know what you don't know. And I always remember the first end of month after leaving Pepsi and looking at my bank account and thinking, how come there's no money coming in? And then very quickly realize, oh yeah, there is no financial tooth fairy out there. Shit, I need to make things happen. So I think desperation forces action sometimes. And with me, I just went, right, what do I have as a skill that I can sell? And there was people I rang, and I started to figure out ways to compress what I'd learned in Pepsi in a big organization, which was phenomenal, and say, right, can I package that in some way to small, medium-sized entrepreneurial businesses? And that's kind of what I started with. And it was a very clunky at the start, very clunky, but I gradually started to get, a few invoices out and then work on getting results, and literally just started like that and learned as I went. I started reading books. I started pretty much doing whatever. It's just all a bit of a blur, because I remember just kind of working all the hours that God gave, trying to figure out how to keep my head above water just to pay the rent. It was very challenging. I don't think looking back was the ideal way to do it, but it was just like, right, sink or swim, let's go. And then luckily I was able to kind of get good work done, get good results, get a couple of referrals, and then it just kept on going from there. And then it was just about keeping the thing moving and making huge mistakes along the way, like we all do in business, and then recovering and then learning from those. And very often, just like life, they're the best lessons of all. And then learning the skills of business. And I realized that I just didn't have a clue about the skills of business. I didn't even know it was a thing. I was in a cocoon in Pepsi thinking, sure, I'm the big man in the corporate world. Sure, I know it all. And then you go out into the real world and you're like, hang on a second here, I don't know how to sell. I don't know how to market. I don't even know how to do financials. Like, I was living in la la land. And so then I realized, life is about learning skills. And so business is about learning the skill of business. I often talk to coaches who are new to the business or consultants and say, listen, the usual gap that they have, Greg, is that they're really poor at the skill of business. And if I'm mentoring them, that's generally where we start. And that's really just learning from the hard knocks. And then I realized, let me find good people that have got those skills, and I will pay money and I will learn from those people. So that's what I did. And then just in passing, as I learned in life myself, then I realized, that's the outer world. There's an inner world where all the skills are as well. So I had to learn the inner skills as well. And that's what I realized I was doing unconsciously. So then I had to kind of go back and re-engineer, or kind of almost work out, hang on, what are the inner skills? So for example, the inner skill of clarity, the inner skill of confidence, the inner skill of self-esteem, the inner skill of goal achievement, the inner skill of communication, so every outer element has got inner skills to it. But for me now, I realize, for me anyway, my focus is on helping others develop their inner skills.
And that is clarity and confidence.
Well, they're symptoms, I think. I think really, like the analogy that I use in that book, The Inner CEO, is that, look, pretend that you have, I've spent a lot of my career working with business owners and CEOs. They've been a good chunk of who I've worked with. And, any good CEO will make it their business to understand, well, hang on, what am I in charge of here? Like, what departments are in this organization and who's doing what? And I'd say, look, pretend you've got an inner organization. And, the way I look at it is you've got four main departments. You've got your intellect, you've got your memory, you've got your identity, which is home to your ego and your self-image, personality, and then you've got your wisdom. And those four entities are the main departments in your inner world, which you have to understand, I think, how to manage each of them. And so, for example, a big game changer for a lot of people, and who knows, maybe there's somebody listening to this today who might go, oh my God, I never saw it that way, is that like your intellect is generally, for most people, is in charge. And the voice of your intellect is your inner voice. So you have an inner voice, Shane has an inner voice, the person listening to this has got an inner voice. And what I'm going to say to you is that's coming from the intellect. It's like a broadcasting machine, but that's not the real you. The fact that I can say to somebody, look, are you aware of what you're thinking or what that inner voice is saying? They go, yeah, it's saying this, this, and this. The fact that you're aware of that, say, well, what's aware of that voice? That's the bit that I'm interested in. That's your potential. So those kind of inner skills are subtle, but actually they can be quite game changing when somebody realizes, hang on, you mean I don't have to listen to my inner voice? I thought I had to. And I go, well, my inner voice tried to make me kill myself. So maybe I got a very valuable lesson that I don't, like, why should I listen to it? You know what I mean? I mean, I do listen to it, but I don't always believe what it says. Because, that'll go up and down in terms of my mood. If your mood goes down, I would think universally what I found is that most people's cynic goes up and their judgmentalism goes up, their suspicion goes up, their paranoia goes up. Whereas when your mood is better, your voice is more stable and it's more supportive and it's less critical, and you're also able to detach from it quicker. So being able to understand like how to harness that inner voice to be able to step away from it is actually a massive, massive thing, not just for having a happy life, but actually for business in general. MIT, the top university in the world, have identified that, like the inner voice, as the single biggest blocker to better creativity, better leadership, and better innovation. So when you hear a top university looking at something that's used to be woo-woo, you have to kind of go, oh, okay, hold on, maybe I need to pay more attention to this.
Okay. And the book is all about that, and finding that within yourself and some practices around it.
The book is about my journey on the inner world, and I kind of give the overall metaphor as what I just said there, but your inner organization. And then it takes you through step by step, I guess, a kind of a process for exploring some of the questions you've been asking me. Like, so for example, in terms of like what's come up here is around, well, who are you really? And how do I become the master of my mind or the boss of my mind? Or how do I untangle or even manage some of the tangled up stuff in a way that actually isn't overly complicated? And that's kind of, I think, in line with common sense. And this is what Morris taught me was, he said, Shane, it doesn't matter what qualifications anybody has. Don't believe anybody. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, don't believe anybody. He says, only look for what works. It doesn't matter how many letters they got after their name. Don't put them on a pedestal. If you like the material, that's great. Check it out. But don't be somebody who's walking around talking about knowledge you learned in a book and making you sound smart. He said, talk about stuff that works. And that really stuck with me.
Has Morris read the book?
He has, yeah.
Did he give you feedback?
He did give me feedback today.
Go for it.
No, but thankfully it was positive. He actually said to me, I'll tell you what he actually said to me because it's still fresh, but he said it inspired him, which is probably the highest compliment I could get from him. So I suppose Morris, he's kind of a guy, I think, who's a lifelong learner, and he's always looking for what else can I see that I haven't seen. And yeah, so that was a really nice compliment to get.
So Shane, it's the beginning of 2024. The Christmas presents have been bought, but they should start this year with an investment in themselves and to buy your book. So I have the book in front of me and I'm planning the year. What little tips can you give your audience? Maybe they're a little bit tangled. Hopefully they've had a rest. Yeah. And they're staring down the barrel of a better year, hopefully. What would you say to someone? What are your little life tips, your life hacks? What are you saying to people?
I think we started this conversation with you sharing a tip. We ran, if I had a great 2024, what would it look like? I think that's a really good place to start. And then the problem is that your inner voice goes, yeah, but you said this last year. You didn't do anything.
Yeah, and look how that turned out.
Exactly. So then that's where you have to realize, I don't have to listen to that thing. I think a very helpful thing is to find somebody perhaps that would maybe want to go on a journey with you over the 12 months. It could be a friend, it could be a mentor, it could be a coach. And you can say, but their job is to hold you accountable to certain things. Say, you know what, this year I'm going to do this, this, and this. Will you come on the journey with me? And will we hold each other accountable? And that could be a free thing as a friend, or it could be a paid thing with a mentor or whoever. Because I think accountability is massive. And I think to me, it's the main reason why New Year's resolutions don't happen, is because of a lack of accountability. There's nobody that you're looking up to or say, I'm going to make it happen here. And I've learned that is absolutely massive, right? And I think a lot of the relationship in the coaching world, I think 50% of it is down to finding somebody who'll hold you accountable. 50%. Most coaches will think, oh no, surely my involvement is higher than that. And I'd say, I really don't think so. Because the magic comes out of the person. It doesn't come out of the coach. The coach's job is to be a catalyst for the magic inside to come out. And a lot of the time it's down to, come on, I believe in you. And sometimes that's just about getting the voice out of the way as well. That helps. And then, as you said there about my book, look, I don't know, there's no point in plugging that too much, but if they have it, there's plenty of stuff in that will be a companion to you. I wrote that book in a way almost to be a playbook, that it's not ideally a one-off read. It's kind of a book that you read it once and go, okay, that makes sense, and I like this and I like that, and that resonates. But I guarantee anytime anybody picks that up, they will learn something new. And it's kind of there, kind of go, as you go along your journey, you get challenged. And that's part actually of your growth, is to be challenged and to see it as part of your growth. And then maybe every now and again you go, you know what, I'm getting stuck here. Who's your man with that book, the inner CEO thing? Let me just pick that up and just scan the chapter and say, actually, that chapter, maybe just look at that chapter. And I think you get plenty of meat out of it, because for me, Greg, it's taken a few years to write the book, but there's 30 years of experience in it. And the intention is that it would save people time and hassle and be a kind of a companion in creating something that maybe a previous version of you thought was impossible.
Okay. How can people follow you? And that I know there's a website.
Yeah. It's my name. It's ShaneCradock.com. It's 1D, CRADOCK.com, ShaneCradock.com. And then also stuff in the book is at theinnerceo.com. I have a podcast called The Inner Edge, which is out every week. It's on all major podcasting platforms. And I send out a weekly email, which is kind of general inspiration every Monday. And that can be accessed through my website.
People's time is very, very precious. So the podcast, what can people expect?
Short 10, 11-minute episodes, kind of about the inner side of business and life and leadership and sometimes sport. Easy to digest, and it's out every Monday morning.
That sounds good. Sounds very, very good. Exactly. Even the dog would appreciate it. You listening while you take them around the block once or twice. That's really good. That's really good, because my God Almighty, we're trying to make precious choices with our time. I've got a few last questions for you, if that's okay. Did you figure out who the hell are you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And I think there's still more to go. But for me, you want the answer to the question, is it?
If you have it, we can do a follow-on episode during the year just to see how people are progressing with their 2024 review.
I'll be open to that. And I think maybe that'd be a better way to do it, because actually the answer, I don't think it's worthy of a short answer. It's a deep answer, deep question, deep answer. So maybe that's better as a follow-up. Yeah.
We'll come back to the listeners again during the course of the year. So there's a bunch of questions that I wanted to ask, and I know you're under pressure. So just one. What's happiness to you?
What's happiness to me? Happiness to me is a state of being. And that's really what it is to me. And there are lots of things that I take pleasure from. But I see a very clear distinction between that and happiness. And for me, the only reason that I'm not happy in any moment, there's only one reason, that's because my mind is getting in the way. And so my happiness is really it's a distinct, clear state of being that is completely within my control.
Okay. Now, my promise to you is I'm going to buy the book, and I'm going to work my way through the book with you during the course of 2024 and check in on you a few times. Is that okay?
That's okay.
And we'll annoy all of our listeners with follow-ups and everything else.
Perfect. That's perfect. No, happy to do that. Happy to do that, Greg.
Yeah. So to the listeners, rock on to your 2024. But to you and me, Merry Christmas.
And also rock on to 2024, Greg, as well.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do both. Shane, thanks a million. Take it easy.
Perfect.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.